Well, welcome to the heart of racing again. Myself and my co-host Will Freedman are here. How are you, Will?
I'm good. I'm excited.
We had some feedback from our first issue. Remember we were talking about Melbourne Cups, Magic Millions. We're not breeding the horses. Well, Chris Roots from the Herald wrote in.
Yeah.
And he said, well, the Freedman brothers went to the Magic Millions sales.
To buy a Magic Millions 2-year-old.
And it won the Melbourne Cup.
Good trainers.
Sub-zero. How did that turn into a say? No, but thanks so much for everyone for their feedback from issue 1. We've got to get into this episode, though, and we have racing royalty with us here in the studio. 94 Group 1 winners. Look, you didn't talk about racing 80s, 90s, 2000s if you didn't talk about Shane Dye and you didn't talk about this man, Darren Beadman, the most famous guys on horseback in the country. Darren, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, great being in the studio. It's great. Fantastic.
And how's life for you now, working for Godolphin?
Living the dream.
Yeah?
Yeah, no, it's been just, coming from, where I was back riding and sort of being ultra competitive, but still being associated with Godolphin and some of the horses that the granddaughters and the daughters and to be associated with Godolphin and still have that connection with that lineage, it just stimulates and gets your adrenaline going.
You still love going to the track, though. You're there all the time.
Yes, yeah, no, that's part of my job with Godolphin, and sort of do race days and trials and go to track work on the odd occasion, just to help out clocking a few horses. So keeps me finger on the pulse and it's, as I said, it keeps me stimulated, keeps me active, and get around to see all your friends and colleagues and whatever. So it's good.
Yeah. Before we get into your big history and successes, just through your work now with Godolphin, do you see what's the main difference between being on the riding side of it and then you're a trainer in your own right, Stradbroke winner. Do you see what's the main difference between the on top of the saddle and sort of, back in the stables?
Well, as a jockey, you're an athlete, and I'm not much of an athlete now, but I've trimmed up a bit. But anyway, but being a jockey, you're an athlete, and you're very focused, and got the blinkers on and game face. But as an assistant, a trainer, as I was for a couple of months, and to be in the position I am now, I feel it's a lot more personal with the horses, and you become a lot more attached to the horses. You spend a lot more time with them. You spend a lot more time with the staff.
Because when you're riding, you're jumping from one to the other to the other. This trainer, that trainer, this owner, the other owner.
They're like, Mercedes and BMWs and Fiats and whoever, you just get on and get off and leave the trainer with the problem. But with it being associated now where I am, you're able to spend a lot more time with the horse and get to know them more of an individual. Like as a jockey, you'd only be on a horse for 5 to 10 minutes going to the gates to get to know the horse and try and work out its little idiosyncrasies and manners and what they're concerned about. So you have to pick up on things very quick, but training, you can sort of digest it and sort of run a little bit in slow motion.
Do you ever cop any nasties from the Sheikh? Does he ring and go, what's going on here?
No, I've met the Sheikh a few times, and I met him over in England, and he's very pleasant. But obviously, he's got a country
racing. He must love racing.
Well, he loves endurance riding. That's one of his passions, and plus he loves the animal themselves, and the operation that has been built up in breeding and racing worldwide is just phenomenal. Yeah.
One of my favourite questions to ask sports stars and former sports stars and try and unlock it from them, and that a lot of them don't like talking about it. The moment when you knew you were good, like you burst onto the scene, you won 2 Sydney apprenticeship titles, you won a golden slipper, like I think 84, really early in your career. Like jockeys come, jockeys go. When did Darren Beadman think, I think I'm pretty good at this?
Look, you're only as good as your last ride.
Yeah.
So I've always sort of tried to keep my feet on the ground and remembered where I came from. So I've never really thought, I've conquered this or I'm good at it.
Did you think you were better than the others, though? Obviously, you had a big rivalry with Shane Dye.
I knew I was up in the top 5, but
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, you always just want that edge to try and be competitive, against the top 5 riders. And there's probably half a length, 3/4 of a length between the top 5, but it's a matter of, trying, and it's continually trying to expertise the gift you've been given. And so yeah, it was. I still feel that, after my last ride I had in Hong Kong, at one, and then had my fall on the Friday, and I still believe that I had still a lot to offer. I had probably had another 5 or 8 years to sort of put into the game as a jockey. But anyway, we just deal with that and move on, and yeah.
Yeah, the fall was devastating. It was in a trial in Hong Kong. I think Will wants to ask you about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting. It's because it's very relevant now. Sort of what happened to you in Hong Kong, because I did the trainer's test a few years ago, and you there's a photo, like it's an old video they still show you. It's the same old video, and you're riding up at track work at Randwick, and I think you had, I don't even think you had a helmet on at the time,
right?
And just the way that's all transpired. How hard was it? Difficult was it when you sort of physically felt? I read some interviews. You physically felt like you could keep going, but like the medical team, and obviously from a head injury. Do you see the kids going through that in other sports, and can you relate to that a little bit?
Oh, definitely. But with the brain injury I had, it was called diffuse axonal injury, which is like a micro bleed of the brain, and the pathways nerves were damaged and whatever.
It was all skewy.
Yeah, so if I ever had a nasty fall again or a nasty head knock, you just wouldn't know what the outcome would be. So I just had to take my medicine and pull up stumps, and which was quite a difficult thing to do when you're sort of right in the, probably I wouldn't say I was in my prime, but I was certainly going along the mountain at a pretty high level. And but it was what it was.
You'd had a sabbatical before. Obviously, this was the ultimate sabbatical from riding because of the injury. That was in 2012, that fall. You'd had one before, and that came about when you went off to become a pastor.
Yeah.
I think it was about 97.
Yeah.
And that was from something that quite cathartic that happened to you when your daughter was born, and you were told she wouldn't be able to maybe speak or hear through her life.
Yes. Yeah, that was, Rach was born in 1991, and I vividly remember it. It was we were in the Camperdown Children's Hospital because she was born with hydrocephalus, and she was deaf, and she had cleft lip, cleft palate, and so we just didn't know. There was a lot of goings on.
Everything's going on.
Yeah. So, and I remember it's the first time I've ever done anything in a religious way. Was I walked past the chapel. I kept walking past the chapel when I was going to a room, and I just felt like I needed to go in there and pray. And it was the first time I prayed, and I believe that was the opening, that because I went and asked, and one thing led to another, and my faith is where I am today, in the sense that I've been able to feel a lot more fullness in my life and inside of me. And when I did go to Bible college for that 2 years, it was something that I really felt I needed to do for myself, to know actually went to Bible college to find out what I'm actually believing in a sense.
But the thing with Rach was that after you were told those things, you found the chapel, these things were happening in your mind, I suppose, but she was able to hear a bit?
Well, yeah. Well, they did the tests with her in the hospital, all the tests that they do, and there was no response. And then obviously they had to, put all the electrodes and everything on her, and they said, well, she's deaf, so, and then we got the pastor at the church to pray for her, and they did the next test, and the doctor come out and said, well, I don't know what's happened, but it's a miracle. She can hear. So she's got hearing. So now she's got 2 cochlear implants, but that was just the enough to really say, hey, hang on a minute,
there's something going on here for me.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I sort of pursued it even more.
Well, Will, you'd have been at school at the time, and you probably remember it. it was the biggest story
Mm.
that Darren walked away.
Yeah.
It was just it was like a seismic event, I suppose.
Yeah, I think I'd ridden, I don't know, 28 winners in the 2 years. Sorry, Group 1 winners in those 2 years leading up to it. So I was really on a roll, but I really felt that, I needed to do it, and it was, the time that I was doing Bible college, I got to be able to see another side to life.
Yeah.
Basically I could smell the roses in a sense. And, going to schools, and had a soup kitchen down at Redfern at the block, my wife and myself, and used to go to jails. And
You were based out of Waterloo?
yes,
or-
Waterloo, yeah. So, it was certainly a chapter in my life
Yeah.
that I just couldn't deny.
There was one moment, and I've spoken to Will about this as we were talking about you. There was one moment I remember in 1996 in the spring carnival, Octagonal hadn't come up. He'd
Yeah.
had that whopping time in 95.
Mm.
And then he wasn't winning, and then you went back on him, and then the talk about you and religion was there in the racing media and everything. You hadn't quite taken your sabbatical, and you go on the back of Octagonal in the Underwood Stakes at Caulfield. He's not winning. He was 8-1 Octagonal in a Group 1 over 1,800 meters, and you win.
Mm.
And so there was the story about you. Here's Octagonal. He's won. You rode him, and you were live on TV being interviewed after weighing out. And Greg Hall came along, who's ridden in the race, and put his face right in the camera next to your face and was looking at you live on TV. He interrupts the interview and goes, "You are God."
You wouldn't expect anything else from Hawley. Yeah, no,
They were good times, though,
they
weren't
were.
they?
Oh yeah, no, it was a great era. We had
Can you
great boys.
imagine that now?
Oh, the drama.
Like,
Well, what about what he said to Craig Carmody when he rode Indigaze to beat Octagonal in his last race at Ramwick?
Yeah,
And they had the planes putting pink O's in the sky, and it was
Yeah.
Octagonal's last race, and of course Intergaze beats him in the Queen Elizabeth, and as they were coming back to scale, Greg Hall rides past the live interview on horseback
yeah.
and says to Craig, "Good on you, Craig," but he said the actual word, "Good on you, Craig, you effed it for everyone."
Yeah.
But while we're talking about good horses, one thing I find that I get asked a lot, and it's not something I can really tell people as a trainer, but try and tell us the feeling between, say, your benchmark 58 horse or your maiden horse,
Yeah.
and what the difference an Octagonal, we're talking Ferraris and we're talking Toyotas, you
Yeah.
know, like how do you describe the difference between the two? Like what's the feeling they give you?
Even from the time you get on them and the time you canter to the gates, you can just feel the quality, like the way that they move, their balance, the way that they carry themselves, the aura about them. It's like sitting in a luxurious car. It's just you got all the comforts, and you've got the bells and the whistles, and you got the engine if you want it, and you can feel them going to the gates, and you think, this thing feels unbelievable. And then when they gallop, they just do it with such ease. And the good ones actually
Purrs. I can hear the motor purring.
It's just you just and like with Lonhro, you could use him a couple of times in the races, where a lot of horses, they've only really got one
run.
You've got to just conserve and what. But those good horses, you can make a few runs on them to get into a spot or to use a bit of gas to get across.
Pull it up, go again.
Yeah, and they're just Lonhro was like that. You'd be able to ride him on a piece of cotton.
And it's interesting, like you often as a trainer, you get feedback from jockeys, and they'll tell you that it feels like it's a winner before it gets to the gates. Like they'll say as soon as they go out trotting along, they say he was ready today. Could be the same horse they rode 2 weeks ago, but today it was ready. I knew it before it got to the gates. So
it's an eerie feeling. But I'd had over 20,000 race rides, and so you get to sort of know that feeling.
So through your career and through the 80s and the 90s, when you're coming through and you're riding all these winners, to Will's question, did you on 2-year-olds that are getting ready, did you tell Bart and all the big trainers, this has got something, or did they tell you this has got something before they put you on?
No, trainers are pretty cagey. They keep a lot
They
to
were,
Say nothing.
they were worse then as well.
Yeah,
like
they-
now the prize money is so good. They don't
Yeah.
worry about the punt as much.
No,
Well,
no.
they just say, ride this, do this, and
yeah,
don't ask any
ride
questions.
this. Yeah, just get a feel for it. Tell us what you think. And Bart was the best at it. You wouldn't like to play poker with Bart. Like he just keep everything to himself.
Really?
Ask a lot of questions. But yeah, he was like with 2-year-olds. But the good ones you just know straight away. Like
Yeah.
they just feel so much more advanced, and it's like they've been here before.
What
good
was
ones.
one? Give us the name of one that you felt.
Well, probably the most prominent one that I rode was forensics.
Yep.
She was just she was like she was a 2-year-old, but really a 4-year-old.
She trained on too.
Yeah. Back in the 80s when I was an apprentice, when I won the Golden Slipper on Inspired, I used to strap him. I looked after him, mucked out his box.
Really,
fed
as an
him
apprentice?
yeah. And he was he's in about box 20, I think it was at Clear Day Lodge for the boss, and I looked after him. So it was a bit like a Tommy Woodcock situation that I actually had an association with the horse before and rode him in his trials and track work, and so I had a pretty good idea of that he was a good horse. But even still, I'd only been riding for a year and a half in races, so I had he felt like in that short space of time that, hey, this is special, this horse, compared to what I'd ridden.
And I know it was your first Group 1 winner.
Yes.
Inspired, yeah. But does that still, even though it was the first, does that relationship you had with that horse, did that make it one of the more special, if not the most special? Because although it was the breaking of your career and breaking out of your career, that personal connection, because horses know they're track work riders. They know how they ride, they know how they feel, they know how they sound. So it must have been special to have such an intimate connection with the horse. Like, you probably would have been happy strapping him in the Golden Slipper at that time.
Exactly. Yeah, no, well, there was certainly a bonding there, put it that way. But he was a gelding. He was by Vane out of Thought. And the Nivison family owned him, and he was a firecracker, and they gelded him, and so
That's early.
Early, yeah, he was gelded. So they gelded him straight away because he was a hard horse to handle, and he was a very sensitive type horse. Like, never wore a bridle when he was, getting ready for the Golden Slipper. We used to have to train him in a head collar with a bit, because he was very head shy and didn't like having a bridle put on him. So the only time we put a bridle on him was when he had to trial or race. So little things like that, sort of go a long way.
Of all those horses, though, so that's your first one, Inspired, and you would go on, and there'd be super duper superimposed back to back miles at Randwick. There's Kingston Rule and Saintly and Melbourne Cups. All of those great horses. Did you elevate any above the other, or are you thankful for the lot of them? Or
Yeah, thankful for the lot of them.
yeah.
You can't, obviously, you got horses that are sort of close to your heart, in the sense that you spend a lot more time with them, as the Lonros and the Octagonals and the Saintleys, and
you love those.
Yeah,
Lonron Octagonal.
yeah,
You
they
love
just
them.
and Hawksy never gave me a sniff too much, prior to their races. So you'd just get on race day, or you get on in a trial, and that was very limited. He'd put someone else on, so you came in when the curtains were ready to come down and the show was on. So
Yeah.
they're very, very special horses.
So for all the glitz and glamour of the winning the Group 1s, who gave you I'm sure you remember who gave you the biggest spray, and I'm sure you've been asked, who's given you the biggest spray of a trainer?
Yes.
Trainers gave better sprays then than they'll ever do now. But
Exactly.
I want to know the harshest one that you're like, I didn't really deserve that, and then the biggest one where you're like, I butchered it, but he told me about it to all end.
Some of them, like Clary, he didn't actually give too many sprays, but you got off your horse and you'd be walking towards him, as you do, to talk to the trainers and owners, and Clary would be standing there with his hand over the rail,
Oh, I can imagine it. I can
And
see
you're
it.
thinking, he's gonna unleash on me. He'd stand there and he'd go,
Would he?
he'd give me
Wipe the brow and give you the
give me the,
like
just-
send off.
yes, give me the red card straight to the jockey's room.
Did you ever if you've slaughtered one, you've run third, you should have won, whatever. It could be a midweek, could be a big race. The horses take a few hundred meters to pull up, you turn them around and you're jogging back. When you're jogging back, are you just thinking, just get me to the jockey room real quick?
Well, there was an incident at Randwick, and it's quite sort of well known, within the racing circles. But John O'Shea, it was like he's very much Sergeant Major John O'Shea, when very, very direct. And
Very correct.
I thought, I'm going to cop it here. I was prepared for it, so I put on the body of armour and sort of got off the horse and walked over, and I knew I was in for it. And it was right when the old member stand was, and the enclosure was out the front of
Right
Randwick.
out the front, everyone can
So
see it.
It was like right in front of the members' bar and everything. There was members there, and well, it was like boot camp. He just unleashed on me, and I didn't have an answer for him. I just had to just cop it. And to be fair, he was right in what he was actually saying, and it was the best spray. But yeah, it was, and the horse did come out and win by 5 next start. It was a horse called Bedouin.
Were you on it next start?
No,
Or he give the ride to RS Die.
Yeah, no, I didn't get the call up. No.
Hey, last week Will and I explored in episode 1 when we had a chat together. Melbourne Cup, Everest, the changing of racing and everything. We don't need to go into the ins and outs of it, but you think back to 1990 and you ride the Melbourne Cup for Kingston Rule for Bart Cummings. You look at the Everest now. Where do you sit in the whole thing? Is there a top race between the two? Does there need to be a top race?
I think like they've both got their rightful place in racing, and they cater for different needs. However, the Melbourne Cup is the Melbourne Cup.
Yeah,
and it's steeped in history. It's some of the great horses that have looked through a bridle, like Farlap and Gunsynd and all those horses back in that era, that they really laid the foundation for Australian racing. And to see where Australian racing has come from and has gone to and where it's going, I think racing's the winner.
Yeah.
Whether it's Everest, Melbourne Cup, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And
it's funny because it's the generational gap because Will really wants to train the winner of the Everest. He wants to train the winner of the Melbourne Cup too. So I was sort of Melbourne Cup-ish. He was Everest. You're kind of my age, so you're a bit Melbourne Cup-ish.
Yes.
It's kind of how you grew up, I suppose.
Yeah. I went and thought about this afterwards, though, and I said,
you can't change.
No,
now.
not changing. I'm saying if you ask me the race I want to win the Everest.
Yeah.
Because it's a kickstart in life, like even for a trainer.
Yeah.
But I thought about it, I'm like, at the end of your training career, which one do you remember more? Probably the fact you were a Melbourne Cup winner rather than an Everest winner. So it's like you almost need to win the Melbourne Cup, but you want to win the Everest. It's like
I think the Melbourne Cup, like, I wasn't riding when the Everest came on deck.
You wish you were.
Yeah, I wish I was. Yeah, but the Melbourne Cup, as soon as you win that race, you've been tagged.
Yeah,
and
your life changes.
Your life changes.
Yeah.
You look just take a rider, for instance, like Michelle Payne.
Oh, completely changed her life.
Exactly. But behind pretty much every Melbourne Cup winner, there's a great story.
Oh, isn't there?
Like Ollie.
Yeah.
Ollie,
the media puzzle after his brother died in track
exactly.
work. Yeah.
There's such a
everything's
such a level of humanity to racing and the Melbourne Cup, and it really opens doors. It takes you places that it's like the gift that just keeps giving.
And for not to take away from the riding element, but say we talk about Clayton Douglas and winning the Everest. Unbelievable feat.
Yeah.
But there's a point of which a sprint race is well done. You've trained a sprinter, but you've also found a sprinter, right? You've found the horse.
Yeah.
Melbourne Cup is more of an art
Mm.
in terms of a training and probably a riding point of view. It's not just being on the horse with the biggest engine. It's being on the horse that relaxes in running. And I was only watching the other day was Glenn Boss talking through the last Maccabi Diva win and how he talks about it and how tactical the whole race unfolding is. And
It opened up. The seas parted for him.
Exactly.
yeah, but he
Didn't they?
But he was wide barrier into on the fence.
It was amazing.
like
That's what I'm saying. The seas parted.
There's so many. When it comes down to Melbourne, there's more variables for a Melbourne Cup than there would be in Everest. Melbourne Cups are developed. The Everests are produced in the sense that it's, that you haven't, like, Melbourne Cup, like Bart, like he bred Saintly.
Yeah.
And he bred him and obviously bought the mare, thinking, well, what side do I send it? So that dream was 4 or 5 years earlier.
Crazy.
And
then it
the
works
way
out.
that he developed it, and he matured the horse and launched him when he needed to and put the amount of mileage into his legs and all those different things. There's such an art.
And they often aren't the most obvious horses as young horses, the staying types. Like, you can have horses that people go, I don't think there's much here because they're so backward and immature that it's like being, like, you're right. The dream starts a long, long way before. But my argument was the dream seems to be a little bit diluted now because there's so many imports coming over. It's the dream starts in Europe these days. So it's I loved the fact, like, the horses you rode that were great stayers. We saw them through their whole career here and got attached to them. And I think that's where the Everest has sort of grabbed that.
There was that. Saintly was the great, he was a great handicap, but he was a great sort of weight for age horse that gets there in the Melbourne Cup in the end.
Well, he won the Cox Plate.
Won a Cox Plate.
The start before.
Exactly.
So, probably the best weight for age race in Australasia. So, it's a remarkable race.
I think Will, you wanted to ask Darren a few things about gear these days, jockeys' gears and the vests and everything.
Yeah, I was a bit in the media about the vests, and it's sort of jackknifing to a degree, and it's funny how racing doesn't really have a lot of research going into, like, we hear bits and pieces of it along the way, but there's not a lot of, from my point of view, from what I hear in the industry, and you might have more insight than I do, but there's not a lot of collaboration and talking about what the concerns are for the participants rather than having someone just saying, no, this is safety and it's optically much safer, but sometimes they're not. So is there anything that you're mainly concerned about?
I think the vests, like, it's got a little bit quiet at the moment. I was, privileged enough to not ride in a vest and to ride in a vest. And if I had my choice, I wouldn't ride in a vest because I fell in a vest, and I don't believe that it had anything to do with my head injury. But after falling in with a vest on, it actually constricts your natural body movement, and it's like you're in a cardboard box
and you just
or
whack.
Cage, and you can't
Roll
roll, or you can't tuck up. You can't just fall naturally. It actually restricts and confines to how you actually move. And I think, and the statistics prove that since the vests have come on board, there's a far greater rate of spinal injuries, neck injuries, and brain injuries.
Like, it's seriously scary because people don't realize it.
So the vest keeps the body straight or something? Is it about protecting the spine or something?
Well,
is that
it's
science
about. Well, no, that's the problem.
Yeah.
I don't believe there was enough research done into what we're actually being told to ride in.
Yeah.
Not actually saying, do you agree to ride with this?
Yeah.
And that they're too stiff. It's like a cardboard cage around you. And
they
say, to protect you from, your internal organs. And yes, there's probably validation with that. but when you look at the statistics, when this lady did she did like a thesis on the VES, it was alarming, the amount of spinal injuries, vertebrae injuries, neck injuries. It certainly needs.
So we've got a way to go.
A long way to
It's
go.
like jumping out of a car at 66, 70 kilometers an hour. Like it's literally that's
falls,
the pace.
the falls.
And falling from a height,
Yeah.
you got, horses falling on you.
Oh.
It's hitting uprights or whatever. Obviously, if you're in a barrier and, the horse rears up and slams you up against the upright, well, certainly that's going to be some sort of protection for you because, but when you're going at speed and when you've got weight and speed combined, it's not a good recipe.
No, it's massive. What about the whip? It's a debate. It seems to be taking twists and turns in Victoria. The whip you started riding with was the old school leather whip with a little leather patch at the end. Crack, crack, crack. Now there's the padded whip. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the minimisation of using the persuader has made the riders better. But I still feel that they need to continue to have the persuader on them in order to, just to wake the horse up or get it to go to where you need to go to, because some of these, like you're dealing with an animal that has a mind of its own.
Yeah.
And so
you need to direct it.
Exactly.
It's like you need to change a car's gears, you need to steer it.
There's a balance in whether it's abuse or whether it's a guide.
Yeah.
And okay, I was probably one of the most fierceful whip users.
Second to Mick Dittman.
Well, Noctagonal, he wouldn't have hardly won a race without using it.
Yeah.
My 2 Melbourne Cups never used a whip on the horse.
Yeah.
So
because they were cruising.
Yeah, but I think the minimisation of strikes, I think is worthy. But I think that it's just a wake up. It's not actually trying to force any more out of the horse.
To keep an eye on the.
And you're talking about gaps that open for split seconds, and if you need your horse to go through that gap to give yourself a chance, I'm imagining giving them a wake up. If it doesn't wake up, the game's over. Like the gap's gone, someone else has gone through it. So
yeah,
you'd be changing the whole game if you took it away completely.
100%.
Righto, Darren. We'll come towards an end here. I did this with Will last week. I want to do some rapid fire with you.
Okay, so I'm not really good.
You'll be all right. You'll be all right.
I'm not real good at rapid fire.
You'll be all right.
I'm a bit of a slow thinker.
Your biggest rival on the track when you were riding in a race, your biggest rival out of all those jockeys?
Depends what era. But Shane, Brownie, Shane Dye and Brownie were probably my 2 biggest rivals. Yeah.
Toughest trainer to ride for, the hardest person.
Oh, gee,
Bart, Theo.
No, look, no, I didn't really have a hard trainer to ride for.
John O'Shea.
No, I'll tell you, John Moore. John Moore.
Yeah. Tough times. Did you ride for him in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I rode for Johnny. For him, I was contracted to his stable for 5 years, and yeah. But everything hinged on winning over there. So you're gonna.
Oh man.
You'll
I've been to Sharks.
As the TAB says now, you win some and you lose more. But in John Moore's case, it was win more, lose less, or lose some.
Yeah, I can imagine. Have you got one, like out of the whole career, one that seriously got away? What one race, a Melbourne Cup, a slip when you know what, I should have won that and I stuffed it, or.
Oh, I try not to think of those ones. Oh, gee. Can I get back to you on that one?
Yeah, for sure you can. You can send us some feedback.
I will, yeah.
And last one for you is, who, unless Will's got a couple.
Oh, I'll tell you which one I should have won.
What?
Was the Victorian Derby on Head Turner.
Oh, really?
Yes, it should have won. Absolutely botched it big time for a Group 1, but I said, don't worry, we'll win the AJC Derby. So we won that.
So you won that.
But if that was any sort of compensation or consolation,
the luxury of being at the top rider. If
Yeah.
if a,
I
if a
butchered, but I'll win. I'll win out.
if a mid-tier jockey comes off and says, no, we'll win the AJC, you go, you're not winning anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's topical at the moment.
Yeah.
This because of what's going on with Craig Williams and Giga Kick.
100%.
Like
yeah.
we had that bad ride last weekend, and they're all saying, "I'll sack him off the horse."
Yeah.
Like you don't
look,
drop
he
a champion
he
league
won't.
player with one bad game.
No, exactly.
Well,
Geez, the Freedmans are tough
Mate,
on jockeys.
Mate, you don't want to get in the trenches with the FBI's, let me
Yeah.
tell you. Don't get in the trenches with them. I've been there, done that.
Will wants to raise what the FBI used to do to you on the school bus. This is our last story.
Right.
yeah. Well, I've heard the Freedman. So I should preface this by saying, like they went from Yass. I don't know what town.
I was the male model from Murray Bateman. Yeah.
So they got the same bus together into Canberra
To
every
school.
day, and I've heard
The same school? Or was it-
No, they went to private school. I went to the public.
yeah,
Yeah.
but the same school bus.
Same school bus,
as
yeah.
the Freedman brothers.
Yeah,
Yes, as the
and
FBI's.
Greg Bennett actually was on the same
Yeah.
bus. But
Yeah.
they've given me a version of events that made it seem like you were the problem and they weren't the problem.
Oh, right.
So
Yes.
anyway, I'd like to hear your version of what I think it was mainly Anthony and Richard. Am I right?
But
Yes.
they used to put you up in the school racks or something.
Yes,
in
so
the
I'd
bag
get,
racks.
So I'd get on at Greenacre at Murray Bateman, and there. So as we get on, they'd take off their school ties and they'd start to rough them up. They were bullies, and I was only at that age when I was probably about 14. I would have been probably 27 kilos.
You'd have been tiny.
27 kilos. I was
So
14
they could
years
throw
old.
you around.
And back in those days on buses, you had where you put your school bags in
in the racks.
in the
yeah.
racks.
Up the top.
Well, I fitted in very easily.
Snugly?
Easily. So there was no pushing and shoving, but I knew I had to give up. So then they tie me up, and it was just horrendous. But then there was another time we used to stop coming home at Hall. Now that it bypasses Hall, the traffic, but we used to stop at a shop, the general store, Mrs. Brown's General Store.
Yeah.
So 30 odd kids would get off the bus and we
Get a super duper or something?
Yeah, super duper or
Bag of lollies.
a sunny boy or something.
Yeah.
And I'd always get pushed back to the end of the line because the Freedman brothers, they just,
Straight up the front.
yeah. And so, you could buy a handful of lollies for 5 cents in those days.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how many times it happened. I was always the last to leave the shop. And I don't know how many times the bus took off and the bus driver would say, everyone on board? And Anthony or Richard would say, yep, everyone's on board, and they'd take off, and I'd be just standing on the side of the road with a bag of lollies, and then I have to ring up my mum and tell her to come and pick me up on the way home.
No
They
mobiles
were cruel.
At that point.
They were
no
cruel.
mobiles at that point.
Yeah,
But,
there's no. I had to get on the. Had to ring up Telstra.
Well,
get
I'm on the
Telstra
side
phone.
of Beadman here, not the
Well,
Freedmans.
Yeah.
I've sided with Beadman as well.
Yeah.
Like it's,
Against your
I've
your
lived
dad and your
a whole life through it. He only had to deal with the bus trips there and back.
yeah, exactly.
But it's amazing that you had this success with Super and like it was all on that bus. Like in
Yeah.
the end it was.
well, I worked. The first stables that I worked in was at Hardwick Stud
Yeah.
for Will's grandfather.
Yeah.
And
Tony.
for Tony, yeah, and they had Loosen Up there, and yeah, I used to go out there and work on weekends, and so that was my first real experience in a racing stable. So we go back a few acres.
The Freedmans and Darren Beadman on the school bus. Geez, imagine now to be on social media. There'd be an outcry.
Nah.
Your uncle and dad would be in all sorts of strife. The poor little kid. Anyway, people would be sending him bags of lollies from all over Australia. Hey, and super dupers. Darren, we've got to let you go. You got to get to the races. It was
Yeah.
an absolute pleasure to have you on
Good,
the
Neil,
Heart of
yeah.
Racing.
That's great.
It was
Fantastic.
fantastic. Loved
And
it.
Will,
Yeah, that was fantastic. But it's yeah. I mean, people
You owe him.
a couple.
I put him through.
Right.
I'm sure I contributed to his private school fees and his golfing.
Yeah.
Yeah, from all the races you won.
100%.
But you know what?
Yeah,
I've heard
golf
this,
lessons.
I've heard this
Yeah,
story a few times from different people, so like, I appreciate it. But I'm sure that
A lot of people think they
you
put
should be
through
more
school.
like I'm paying you. You should get Richard to call his farm after you up at Broke, then you can pull the chips in there. But
Yeah,
might
Dazzle
be a bit-
Lodge or something.
Dazzle Lodge.
Rightio, Darren Beadman.
Beadman's barn.
Yeah, that's right.
Mate, you are a legend of racing. Thanks for coming in.
Cheers. Thanks, fellas.
Cheers, thanks.